My name is George Baker. I'm with Blackwater Beekeepers Association. Our website is right on the front there by the presentation, and also my email address. Feel free to write that down if you like. Also, I do something with my presentations. I make them available for download online. So if you see something that's written on one of the slides, don't worry about trying to write it down or remember it. You can take a picture if you like, but I'll have the web address at the end, as well as a QR code if you're familiar with those. You can download it for free, no charge, anything like that. There are 2 slides though. I will tell you I will be saying some things that aren't on there. That is in the presentation, so you won't have to worry about that. All right, so this is what we're going to cover today. It's going to be a little fast and furious because I got a lot to cover, but hopefully we'll have some time at the end for questions. I'm going to be talking about why is pollination important. A lot of people don't understand that. We'll talk about what is pollination, who are the pollinators. I'm going to talk about native, and I'm also going to talk about honeybees. And some of you are probably saying, aren't they the same thing? They're actually not, and we'll talk about why that's different. We'll also cover some native plants that you can plant in your yard today to help the pollinators and help your yard. Where am I at? And then, most importantly, we're going to talk about why are the pollinators struggling. I've had a lot of people ask me today, are honeybees still okay? Yes, honeybees are okay. They've really always been okay. It's the native pollinators that not, and we'll talk about why. And after that, of course, we're going to talk about how you can help them. Some really easy things you can do. And the most important thing of this whole presentation is how I can save you time and money. And I'm not going to be asking for any money from you. I'm not here to sell anything. I'm just going to talk about how you can make your life easier and help the pollinators at the same time. So let's talk about why pollination is important. Well, first off, it puts the color on your plate. A lot of those nice, pretty vegetables that you eat at dinner and at lunch, the salads that you eat, the nice colorful peppers, all of those depend on pollinators. Without the pollinators, there would be none of that. Pollinators are responsible for somewhere in the neighborhood of 75 to 90% of the food we eat. Some people say one spoonful out of every 3 is without pollinators, we wouldn't have it today. Now, also some people say if pollinators disappeared, we'd all die in 4 years. No, we wouldn't. But our diet would be very bland, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. The next off is it saves you money at the grocery store. We've all heard about self-pollinating plants, right? Well, the problem with those is they're not as productive. They don't yield as much fruit and vegetables as they do when they're pollinated. So pollination actually increases the yield from the same plants. So when those plants get to your store, they're cheaper because there's more supply. It helps your garden grow. A lot of your trees and your beautiful flowers and your native bushes that you have in your yard are dependent on pollinators today. And by pollinators, I'm not just talking about honeybees. I'm talking about the whole gambit. And we'll talk about some of those in a minute. And last but not least, it helps feed the wildlife that we have. Pollination creates seeds and vegetables and fruits. A lot of those seeds fall to the ground. I had a gentleman said, I want to grow sunflowers so that the birds will eat the seeds that fall. Well, without pollinators, we're not going to get those seeds, or we're not going to get as many of those seeds. So those are some of the reasons why we need pollination. Now take a look at this picture. This is what breakfast looks like today with pollination. You've got your nice glass of milk, and some of you guys are probably saying, and ladies are probably saying, pollinators don't pollinate cows. No, they do not. But they pollinate the alfalfa that those cows eat. Alfalfa is dependent on a few specific pollinators, and without those specific pollinators, we don't have any alfalfa. Then we've got orange juice. Orange trees are pollinated. They're dependent upon pollination. Next off, we've got your cup of coffee. That's coffee beans, another pollination-dependent item. Then in that bowl, that's a bowl of yogurt. Yogurt's made with milk, right? Pollination. We've got blueberries and strawberries. Believe it or not, there's a fly that pollinates strawberries. It's a specialist to the pollination. Although honeybees can also do pollination to strawberries. We have blueberries, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but there's a specific bee that is responsible for pollinating blueberries. Once again, honeybees can help, but they're not a primary pollinator. So that's what it looks like today. If we take pollinators out of the picture, this is what your breakfast table is going to look like. You got a glass of water and oatmeal. Oats are what we call wind pollinated, so they don't depend on an insect or an animal for pollination. And you've got your bread, which some would argue there might be some stuff in the bread that depends on animals or insect. But if you go with just a true, like wheat-based bread, that is also wind pollinated. So let's talk about what pollination is. So we've got two flowers here, and I'm going to step down here real quick. So flowers comes in two types. We have an imperfect and a perfect flower. When you talk about a self-pollinated plant, that's a perfect flower. It is both male and female. So the female is this stigma here, the pistil here, and then the male here is these stamen parts on the outside. So the way pollination works is a bee or another insect pops down on a flower, and they're going after the nectar. The nectar is created by your flowers to draw in pollinators because it's good and yummy. Just like we all like a good candy bar or a cup of ice cream, the bees and all the pollinators, they want that sweet stuff. And that comes from the nectary, which is way down here. And that creates all that nectar. So the pollinator goes in there heading for this nectary. Well, all your pollination, or your pollen, is created up here at the top of the anthers. So as they're passing that, it's collecting on their body. So they leave, and then they go to the next flower. They go to the next flower, they come down here. Well, what's right here at the very top? That is the top of the female, that's the stigma. So that pollen brushes off, goes in the stigma, goes down the style, and goes to the ovary, where the ovules are. And those ovules take a piece of pollen, and it creates a seed out of that ovule. And over time, as more and more pieces of pollen, and this is why lots of pollen is more important than just a self-pollination, the more pollen you get in there, the more seeds are created. The more seeds are created, the larger your fruit or vegetable. And that ovary there is what turns into the fruit of the vegetable. It actually creates a protective coating for those seeds. So that's how pollen works, and that's why it's important. So I'm going to show you in just a second why self-pollination is okay, but it's not great. So all those plants you see at the store and says, oh, it's self-pollinated. Yeah, it is, but if you want fruit from it, it ain't going to happen. Or it may happen and they look like, you get these little funky looking peppers, or you get these little cucumbers that look like a little curlicue, right? So this is the self-pollination versus cross-pollination. So first off, genetic outcome, okay? We've all heard about diversity, right? And how it's important not to, marry your sister or your brother. We need diversity in those genetic makeup. Well, if you self-pollinate, you're pollinating with the same genetic makeup that you are. So what happens with that? Well, you create a weaker plant. If whatever the plant has that is weak with them, they may be subjected to disease. They may have certain traits that result in small fruit. You've magnified that multiple times because you're pollinating with the same pollen. Well, when you cross-pollinate, you get the best of both worlds. So now those negative things are recessive, and the positive things are I forget the word, but they accumulate. So you get a better plant, a more sturdy plant, more fruit, more seeds. They live longer. Adaptability. Once again, same thing I just covered there. Plants will adapt to their environment, and they do that through, I don't want to say necessarily evolution, but if a plant can adapt to its environment, it's going to die and it's not going to reproduce. So the ones that live and continue to live in that, thrive in that environment are the ones that reproduce. Well, you want those traits. You don't want those traits of those plants that can't reproduce, and if they're self-pollinating, they're going to propagate those bad traits instead of the good traits there. Adaptability, pretty much the same. Energy cost. This is actually a positive on the soft-pollinated side. It doesn't have to create that nectar as much, right? Because it's not trying to draw in pollinators. It's just trying to pollinate itself. Whereas with the cross-pollination, it has to spend a lot of energy creating that nectar to draw in those pollinators to get them pollinated. Fruit and seed quality. I've kind of hinted at that already. As you get those cross-pollinated plants, you get a stronger seed, stronger bush. Now, I don't want to scare y'all. This is about as deep as I'm going to go with the science, okay? From here on out, we're going to talk about fun stuff. I don't want to scare anybody off, okay? I meant to mention that earlier, but I felt like this is you need a foundation, right? To kind of make sense of everything else I'm talking about. And last but not least, you've got dependence, okay? Self-pollination can depend on wind and water. They're not dependent upon insects, right? I mentioned earlier, wheat and oats are wind pollinated. The hay fever we get every spring, that's wind pollination because that's how it gets in the air. Insect pollination is what the cross pollinators are dependent upon, so that's kind of a plus for the self-pollinators. So who are the pollinators? Well, we've got bees, butterflies, moths, beetles, and wasps, and flies, okay? There's a lot more in there, but if I covered all of the different groups of pollinators, we'd probably be here till next month. So I decided to take a little, make it easy on us and not get you out of here in a reasonable amount of time. So I've got these here too. I want to include it, kind of make these fun. I'm used to talking to it behind me. I'm going to give you a couple of honeybee facts to kind of make it fun. In the world, there's 20,000 species of bees throughout the world right now today. In the North America and Mexico, you got 3,600 different species. Because a lot of people, when you think about bees, right, you think about honeybees or bumblebees or carpenter bees. Well, there are so many different bees. You got these little sweat bees that you can hardly see. And then you've got these giant honeybees in Asia that are like huge. And they're the ones, if you see the pictures of the things where the guys climb up on the cliffs and they get the honey out of the big honeycomb. Those are giant honeybees that are in Asia, right? So there's 3,600 different kinds in the United States. In the whole world, there's only 8 species of honeybees. 8 species. Now, how many of those species do you, and I want a raise of hands, do you think are native to the United States? Raise your hand. Y'all are all right. There are no current native honeybees in the United States. We get them all from Europe. All of our honeybees in the United States are from Europe. That isn't to say they weren't here at one time. They have found a fossil dated back about 14 million years ago in Nevada that was a honeybee. So they were here at one time, but they're not here today. So here, what about some cool stuff about the honeybee? Well, like I said, they came over in the 1600s. What slide am I on? They came over in the 1600s from Europe. They started importing them on the ships, and they imported them until about 1922, until for a various number of reasons we stopped importing bees in the United States. In the U.S., honeybees are considered livestock. They are regulated by most agricultural organizations in states. For instance, there is one disease that they can get called American foul brood, and they can come in, the state can, and destroy your hives, because that is the only way to treat American foul brood. American foul brood, yes, only way to treat it. And it is deathly contagious, and it will kill lots and lots of honeybees. Honeybees are generalist. They will feed on just about anything they can feed on, where a lot of your other bees and a lot of your other pollinators are specialists, and we'll talk about some of those in a minute. And by specialist, I mean they depend on one plant or one tree. And if that plant or that tree is not here, you're not going to have that pollinator available. A great example of this that a lot of people are familiar with are milkweed and monarchs. Monarchs lay their eggs on milkweed plants. No milkweeds, no monarchs. That's one of the reasons why they're struggling, because the milkweed's going away. Honeybees make humongous colonies. A lot of your pollinators are not social creatures. They're off by themselves. So a carpenter bee, for instance, its nest may have only 5 to 10 babies in it, and then there's another carpenter bee with 5 to 10 more. One honeybee hive, 40 to 60,000 bees at any given time during the season. Some hives may even have 80,000. The big difference there is we can depend on honeybees to pollinate certain plants that we can't depend on other pollinators. Perfect example is almonds. Without honeybees, you would not be able to afford almonds in the store. Well, I can't say that, but I know I couldn't afford it. They would probably be up there about the price of gold. Because every year we send 2 million hives from colonies from across the state to California just to pollinate the almond crop. Another good example is watermelons. You can put a hive in a watermelon field, a massive watermelon field, and because you've got so many bees, you can easily pollinate them. Now, they can't pollinate everything effectively. There's something called buzz pollination, where a pollinator actually has to go and shake that part I showed you, that they have to shake it to break the pollen loose. Honeybees can't do that. And one example is tomatoes. Honeybees generally cannot pollinate tomatoes. Another one is anything with really deep tubular flowers. They can't pollinate those because they can't get down in the bottom, but there are other animals that can. A lot of them are specialists. However, they may not be great at pollinating everything, but they can fill in. A great example is blueberries. Blueberries, honeybees are accidental pollinators. they don't go to the blueberry with the intention of pollinating it. They just want the nectar. They don't collect hardly any blueberry pollen like they do everywhere else. But the way they pollinate is as they're walking across the flowers to get the nectar, they just happen to pick up a little pollination, a little pollen, and then they pass it on. So, native bees. These are some examples of some of the native bees that are right here in Horry County. And sorry, I gotta take my glasses off, I can't see. The first one you see there is the squash bee. And squash is another plant that really needs a specialist. Honeybees can do an okay job because with squash plants, you have imperfect flowers. There's a male and a female flower on a squash plant. You guys have probably seen this. I got any gardeners growing squash? Okay. So you see some of your flowers will grow a squash and some won't. The ones that don't are male, the one that does are female. So something has to go from plant to plant, okay? And that's the squash bees do that. One cool thing about squash, and I don't know if you've done this, but if you while the squash is growing and the flowers are there, go out there early in the morning, like 6 or 7 o'clock, and look very closely. You'll see the male squash bees will actually sleep in the flower because they don't have a home to go to. It's kind of cool. Then you got the leafcutter bee. How many people have gone out to your plants and you see a little semicircle cut out of the plant, looked like somebody took a bite right out of the leaf? That's probably a leafcutter bee, and they're using that little chunk of leaf to build their nest. And they go back and they hang out in their nest, and they are specific to they can do the alfalfa I was talking about earlier. Now, leafcutters are also excessively sometimes I lose my words. Excellent pollinators. They're better than honeybees because they carry the pollen on their stomach, whereas the honeybees pack it on their legs. So that pollen's just sitting there, and as they're flying through the different plants, it rubs off a whole lot easier. So they're very excellent at pollination. And then you've got the bumblebee, which is another generalist. And the interesting thing about a bumblebee is it does the buzz pollination, so it can do the tomatoes and the other plants, those kind of things. And you're probably saying, why am I talking about all these pollinators? Well, when we get to the plants in a minute, you'll see why, because you generally match plants with pollinators. And then last but not least, mason bees. These guys are good because they come very early in the season. So if you want like an apple tree or pears, honeybees generally don't pollinate those because the flowers open up too early. But the mason bees are there to pick up the slack. Now you've got the nice butterflies, and everybody loves the butterflies. I'm going to talk about the two on the end, the zebra longwing and the Gulf fritillary at the same time. The longwing is actually from Florida. It's a snowbird. It likes coming up here when it's cold, kind of, well, actually reverse. It likes coming up here when it's warm, and it goes back down there when it gets cold. But they are dependent on passion flowers, or anybody knows maypop? Heard of a maypop? They're depending on the maypop plant, okay? Just like the Gulf fritillary they are also dependent on the maypop plant. With the fritillary, their caterpillars specifically feed on the maypop. So if they can't eat it, no butterflies. And those guys are pretty. I'd like to see them in my yard. Then you got the Palamedes swallowtail. These are kind of a little different. They depend on trees, the red bay trees that are out in the swamps of Georgetown and Horry County and the swamp bays. And they tend to live in the coastal areas like this. Once again, no trees, no plant. And last but not least is the monarch. And we've talked about those already. They're dependent on the milkweed. Now, the interesting thing about monarchs is we have two types here. We have ones that fly through every year. They live for several months. They're more migratory. And then we have our local guys who only live for a couple of weeks. So I always find that fascinating. And then we've got moss, tobacco hornworm. You probably hate that guy, right? The hornworms in your tomatoes. Yep. But those are actually helpful in that the moths that result from the tobacco hornworm have a very long proboscis, which is basically their tongue, and they can get in a lot of those deep-throated plants and flowers that other pollinators can't. And then we have the goldenrod shoulder beetle. Who here has hay fever because of goldenrod in the fall? Okay, that is actually a misconception. You probably are getting it from somewhere else, and that's because goldenrod is very sticky and clumpy. It can actually not fly up. Now, that's not to say you're not allergic to it, But a lot of people just assume it's goldenrod, and unless you're actually touching the stuff, getting into it, you're not going to be allergic to it. But these little beetles here, and that's a picture of one on the screen, they hang out with them, and their larva actually eats a lot of your garden pests. So maybe plant some goldenrod, you'll get the beetles, and it can kind of take out some of the other pests you've got in your garden. Wasps. Who knew wasps were pollinators? Right? We're always like getting worried about getting stung, right? Getting stung by a wasp. But the thing is that, and where I'm going with this is, it's kind of a circle of life, right? Kind of like a Lion King thing. Everything plays on everything else. So your wasps, they tend to eat the garden pests also, and they lay their eggs in the hornworms. So if you don't like your hornworms, don't kill your wasps, because your wasps will lay the eggs in it, and then they'll kill the hornworms for you. And then, let's see. And they inadvertently pollinate. Wasps do not have hair. That's a way you can tell a wasp from a bee, okay? If you've got a flying thing running around and it has no hair on it, you can't see any fuzziness, that's a wasp. If it's fuzzy, it's probably a bee. And last but not least, we got flies, and there's lots of different ones on them. But the interesting thing is, like I mentioned earlier, there's one that actually pollinates a strawberry. So the plants. Let's talk about the trees and shrubs, and we'll talk about the perennials. And can you go ahead and do the tickets? We're going to give, after the plants, we're actually going to give away a t-shirt. So Lucas here is going to give you a ticket. We'll put everybody's ticket in a box, and we'll get you a free t-shirt here in a little bit, hopefully. Oops, that's not where I want to be. So where did I have lost my slides. Hold on a second. I don't know where my slides went. I'm sorry, I got out of order there. I'm about to fix that. All right, so trees and shrubs. We talked about it earlier. We've got the red bay, and that's the host for the Palamedes swallowtail. We've got wild black cherry. Now these are all the plants I'm going to talk about are native. And natives are important because the native pollinators have evolved to pollinate the native plants and vice versa. So they're kind of a synergistic effect, right? The sum is greater than the parts. So we got white black cherry, and it blooms in the late spring. And then of course it's also swallowtail, and the nectar bloom is awesome for that tree. So in the spring, it lots and lots of nectar, which will pull these pollinators in. Then we've got the buttonbush. Now the buttonbush is nice because it blooms in the July to August standpoint when there ain't nothing else blooming. So all of your pollinators are running around trying to get fed. There's nothing out there to feed them, so that's one good one for them. And then let's see, sparkleberry. Sparkleberry is drought tolerant. So this is how many droughts do we have here a year? I should probably ask, how much does it rain here a year, right? When I first moved here, I looked it up, and it was like 52 inches a year on average. I said, great, I don't have to worry about watering my lawn. What it didn't tell me is that's 5 to 10 inches at a time. So I'm like, no, I have to water my garden, not my lawn, my garden. So the point is the native plants are also more drought tolerant than the stuff you buy at Lowe's, so you don't have to water them as much. And of course your southern magnolia, my wife loves these magnolias. And magnolia, interestingly enough, is pollinated by beetles, not primarily by beetles. Now your perennials, I mentioned the seaside goldenrod, that's late fall. Then we've got the butterfly weed, which is a type of milkweed. So this is the monarch post. This is important. And it thrives in dry and sandy soils, which we have lots of that here, right? And it has a very deep taproot, so it's also drought tolerant as well as the other ones. And we also have another milkweed there. I'm not going to cover that one. That's also a host. We have the black-eyed Susan, and that's a summer, so it's drought tolerant. So when it's nice and hot and dry, we don't have to worry about it. The only thing with it is it acts as a biennial, so you may have to replant it every 2-3 years. And these seeds, we talked about seeds earlier. The goldfinches love the black-eyed Susan seeds. So if you get good pollination on that plant, you're going to have the seeds are going to let the seeds fall. You don't deadhead it. If you want to feed the pollinators, don't deadhead your native plants, because while that will give you another flower, it's not going to give you any seeds to pollinate anything and to help the pollinators. And spotted bee balm. Spotted bee balm is awesome. I mean, it is just a huge super pollinator plant. It's pretty, and it thrives down here. And it grows well in the summer. The only thing is you need to plant them kind of far apart. They're not invasive, but they will tend to start to clump up, and every couple of years you'll need to pull them apart. Then we've got we talked about that a minute ago, the passion flower maypop. And you guys, we're giving away a t-shirt if you'd like a ticket, if you hang around for a couple of minutes. Okay, have you got everybody? Okay. And we talked about that earlier. It's that host plant, and it has edible fruit. You can actually eat maypops. So they're interesting. The reason why they're called maypops, by the way, is when people first discover them, they'd be walking through the woods, and they'd step on something, and it'd go boom. And it was the fruit popping underneath their feet. The coral honeysuckle. I didn't talk about hummingbirds earlier, but hummingbirds love the honeysuckle. Now, you got to stay away from the Japanese version of this. Japanese honeysuckle is invasive. The coral honeysuckle is not. And the difference is the color. Look, if you look it up, it's the color of the honeysuckle themselves. I believe the Japanese is yellow and white. So most of the honeysuckle that we had when we were kids, a lot of that was Japanese honeysuckle. Carolina jasmine, this is important. Carolina jasmine is our state flower. It is toxic to bees, honeybees specifically. Most other bees can handle it. So if you've got honeybees, you want to have honeybees, your neighbor has honeybees, don't plant any jasmine. Now granted, it does take a lot to be toxic, and most of your bees will ignore it, because if there's something better, they will go get it, but just kind of keep that in mind. And your crossvine, that's another hummingbird favorite, and it's semi-evergreen, so if you don't have a bad winter, it will stay green throughout the winter, so it'll make your yard look good. And these are some, I'm not going to go through this list, but these are some honeybee-specific plants that you can plant. And if you choose to grab the PDF, of course, it's in there. Have you got everybody? Hey, you got everybody? Okay, so let's go back here. All right, so we're going to do another drawing. And so that this is totally impartial, let's see. You want to draw for me? Yeah, leave your ticket down here. I'm sorry, it's too tall, isn't it? All right. All right. So we've got, I'm going to give you the last four. 7355. 7355. Who's awesome? Okay, so right after the presentation, see me. I'll give you a little form, and you can go over and pick a t-shirt out. It is limited to what we just have here, so hopefully we should be able to do, and you can go ahead and put those up. We are going to do another one at the end, so keep your tickets, and hopefully somebody else will get a t-shirt today. All right, so let's do another honeybee fact. The average honeybee only makes 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey in their lifetime. 1/12 of a teaspoon. Does anybody know how many 1/12 of a teaspoon is in a pound of honey? 768. So 768 bee lifetimes went in that pound of honey that's sitting in your cabinet right now at home. It sounds pretty bad, but it's not really, because remember, we talked about early, those honeybees, 60 to 80,000 in that bees at any time. The average bee lifespan during honey making season is about 4 to 5 weeks. So it's not like we're killing them, they're killing themselves with work. But, so yeah, there's 64 teaspoons in that pound of honey, and the honeybee is the only one that makes food for the only insect that makes food for humans. Now, there's lots of insects that humans will eat. I don't know why, but they do. But it's the only one that makes it actually for the humans. So let's move on. So why plant native plants? They have natural defenses for disease and insects. We talked about that. They're evolved to handle the local environment. They need less water. We talked about that too. The ones that are less water need will continue to grow. I don't know why I have trouble speaking today. They're co-involved with the local pollinators. We talked about that as well. They require less supplemental feeding. They've adapted themselves to the biome in the soil where they're planted. So they're used to the food that's there, right? So you don't have to run to Lowe's every 2 weeks and buy that big bag of fertilizer to fertilize that native plant, because it's used to being where it's at. it knows, it's adapted itself to feed off of that stuff. They support the local insects and birds. You know, the birds will come around, might eat a seed, drop it somewhere else, help them procreate. And they're less likely to be invasive and introduce new allergies. Think about this. You know, we've got, it was just in the news recently, it was the kudzu. They were talking about the kudzu. That came from Asia, and that's just everywhere. It's cut. I seem to think it's cut back recently, but it's not. Crepe myrtle, not a crepe myrtle. What's a Bradford pear? Bradford pear is very invasive. That's actually illegal to plant or buy in South Carolina now. There's lots of. You can talk all day about all the invasives, and what was happened is somebody looked at it and said, "That looks like a cool plant. I'm going to take that home and plant it." Well, they took it from Europe and planted it here. It was adapted to Europe, and there were controls in Europe to control it. They bring it here, there's nothing that can fight it, and it just goes crazy. And last but not least, they can help their local pollinators because our habitats are disappearing. And that leads us to the next thing, and this is kind of the sad part of all of this. Native habitats for these pollinators are going away, and that's what's causing them to struggle. That's what's causing them to die. Think about how many of us here, when we were a kid, saw remember the fireflies when you were growing up? When's the last time you saw a firefly? When's the last time you saw a monarch butterfly, for that matter? I can remember when I used to go on road trips with my family in the 70s, you'd have to get out at every stop and scrape the windshield because there was like a literal just sheet of bugs. When's the last time you've had to do that? The insects are going away. So we have to protect them. We have to do what we can to protect them. And this is what's happening. Urban sprawl. They're taking down all the trees. They're taking down all the native plants. They're cutting all this stuff down, and they're putting up HOAs with big, huge green lawns that not a single insect in this world will touch. I mean, I don't like grass. Do you guys like grass? So I'd much rather have a pretty flower than a green stick of grass that doesn't have any nutritional value unless you're a horse or a cow, maybe. And that leads us to the second one, is these monoculture lawns. You know, you want to buy a new starter home. You go to this wonderful, beautiful HOA. They've got grass everywhere, nothing else. And you got house after house after house with this. And so we're taking away all this stuff that feeds the pollinators, and we're replacing it with basically junk food. And then connectivity. This is important too. A honeybee will generally fly up to 3 miles for food, okay? If a pollinator has the, I'm blank. And if the pollinator has the disadvantage of being born somewhere where there is no food for them and they're too far away, they're going to die. And that's what we're doing basically. You know, we've got all these pollinators, and then somebody wakes up and says, "Hey, let's put a housing development here." When that pollinator is born, all of a sudden the trees are gone, the bushes are gone, everything else is gone, you know, because they cleared it that winter, and the pollinator is born that summer, that next spring or whatever, and it's gone. So they die. They can't. So what are some of the other threats? Well, you got pesticides, okay? They can be sprayed directly. They can be sprayed on plants, and the pollinators will then eat those plants and take them back to their hives and spread that poison throughout their hive. And then there's the indirect by herbicide use. A great example of this is Roundup. They did a study on Roundup not too long ago. The active ingredient on Roundup is glyphosate. Okay, they tested glyphosate with honeybees, and they tested Roundup on honeybees. The kill level, or the amount of bees that it killed, was a whole lot higher with the Roundup than it was with the glyphosate. And the reason why they surmised, and they couldn't prove it because the makers of Roundup wouldn't confirm anything, but the secret sauce in Roundup that was added to the glyphosate is what killed the bees. It caused them that many more bee kills. So those are things that are happening. Now, all is not lost. You can still use a lot of herbicides and pesticides, but you can do it educatedly, and you can do it wisely. Like, go with organics. Spray in the early morning or the late at night when the pollinators aren't around. A lot of your organics will, once they're dry, they're no longer lethal. Those some of the things you can have. Another problem is invasive species and diseases. Just like we bring the invasive flora, and I've got that on here, the things like the kudzu here, We have other insects and other animals that come from overseas. They hitchhike on these big boats, and they come across as well, and those threaten our various pollinators. Honeybees, it seems like every time, every 6 months, there's a new invasive species that's coming over and is going to kill my bees. And it's true, there's things on the horizon, and we just have to deal with it, but we have to be aware of it. And of course, pathogens, same thing with diseases. And then we have, this last one, there's not a whole lot we can do about it, but we need to be aware of it because it's important. Climate and coastal vulnerability. So salt spray and storm surges. So if you've got a beachfront house and you go plant a bunch of non-native stuff on it, I can guarantee you the first time we have a nice little king tide or a tropical storm come through, they're all going to die because you just sprayed them with salt water. But there are lots of plants out there, native ones, and they're pollinators that can survive it. The next thing we have is something called phenological mismatch. And I apologize for that big 50-cent word. I tried to find another word that meant the same thing, that wasn't like a sentence this long. But in English, what that means is it's hot when it's supposed to be cold, and it's cold when it's supposed to be hot. And what happens here is let's say in January, we have a bunch of 60-degree days, and then in February, we have what we had last January, which was miserable. What happens is these 60-degree days get going, and the plants go, ooh, it's spring. And they start flowering, and they start budding and everything. And then this cold happens, and snap happens, and you lose all those flowers. And they don't come back until next year. So the pollinators don't have anything to eat. That can't be right. Where am I with time? Okay. I'm still doing good. And then last but not least, rare natural disasters. What happened in Asheville this last year with Hurricane Helene? Everything washed away, right? There are areas in Nashville that will probably not grow things for years because the topsoil is gone. The environment is gone. The ecosystem is gone. So those pollinators that were there, they have nothing left to feed on. And they have nothing left to eat. So we have to be conscious of when things like that happen, how are we going to handle it? All right, so how can you help? This is the fun part, at least for me. So this is what, you move into this HOA, you bought your new house, and I use HOAs because they're kind of an example, but you go with a home builder, they build your custom house somewhere, and of course, what are they going to offer you out the gate? Okay, well, we're going to landscape it for you. So you move in and this is what you got. You got a bunch of annuals that you got to replace every March from Lowe's, okay? None of them feed the local pollinators. Some of them are sterile, so they won't even reproduce at all, so they don't generate any pollen, any nectar, any of that stuff. And yeah, so they're just there. So you're going to go every March. You're going to have to go to Lowe's. Okay, get that big bag of fertilizer that I'm going to have to put on there every 2 weeks. I'm going to have to get all of these plants, a couple $100 of plants, put them in my yard every year. Now, if you enjoy that, go for it. Have fun. And then you're going to have to water, your water bill is going to go up because every week you're going to have to water it because it's not adapted to our heat, right? So what can you do? Well, the first step you can do is you can go to Lowe's and look at some of the local things and look at some of the native plants that they might have, or just some of the pollinator-friendly plants they might have. Things like marigolds and pansies and tulips and petunias. Now, there's some annuals there. You might have to take a couple of trips in March. But there's even a step beyond that you can do. Just go with all natives. To me, I think that's a beautiful yard. But that person's not going to have to go to Lowe's or Home Depot every March. They're not going to have to buy a lot of fertilizer and pesticides and all of that stuff. And their water bill is going to be beautiful because most of those plants are very drought tolerant. Excuse me, I can't talk today. And then there's this. There's what we call the green premium. They've actually done studies on this. Is our native yards actually desired? Well, we all know who's ever sold a house is you got to have your yard landscaped when you sell that house, right? So why not better to do it with natives? And this is kind of some of the spreads. So a non-native traditional landscape, you're looking at about $12,000 an acre. So most of the houses around here, what, quarter acre, eighth an acre? So we'll kind of split that down to, what's that, 4-3? That's about $1,500, $2,000 for an eighth of an acre to landscape it, right? Native pollinator landscape, you're looking at $2,000 to $4,000. Then the next one we've got your ROI, return on investment. Look at that, 150% return on investment from your time savings, right? Your money savings. Being able to spend March with your family instead of out in your front yard planting plants. the grandkids coming over, whatever, right? Water requirement, look at that, 60 to 80% lower. I'd take a 60 to 80% break in my water bill. And last but not least, your chemical requirement, almost none for pollinators. So, what are some ways you can save the pollinators? You can support and preserve their habitats. And the ways you can do that is find an area in your yard, a corner or something, and just let it go wild. Just leave a little bit of rubbish there, maybe leave the ground barren, because a lot of your pollinators are ground nesting. They will nest actually in the ground, and they look for barren patches of ground that they can nest in. Bumblebees nest in rubbish. So if you've got a little pile of leaves or a little pile of sticks, that's where your bumblebees are going to nest in. Go chemical free. I talked about that earlier. Try to go. I'm not crazy in thinking that everybody is just going to go chemical. You got to have pesticides down here. I mean, this area. Oh man, oh my God, they tore my garden up last year. Anybody who's tried to plant anything knows that it's hard to do. But try to choose your organic alternatives and spray before and after sunset when the pollinators aren't out. And we talked about the pollinator-friendly plants. We had those. You want to go underground for the bees. I just talked about that as well. Trees. One tree is the equivalent of an acre of pollinated plants in a lot of cases. There's a tree called a linwood, and that versus an acre of clover is the equivalent amount. So trees take up a lot less space. So look for native trees that are pollinator friendly. Always be learning. Pick up YouTube. Look at your gardening magazines. Visit a gardening club. Be a volunteer. Talk to your county or your city. They may have some areas that could need some prettying up, and go with natives instead of non-natives. And then community service, and of course talk to your friends and relatives. And then we got our last drawing. So somebody come here and pick a number. Let's see. Oh, I'm sorry. Is there anybody who doesn't have a ticket? Come get a ticket. I'll give you.
Tickets here.
You'll pick my drawing. Okay.
Get some tickets here.
I got nothing to give.
How many tickets do we need? 2? Hold on a minute. Put it back in because I gotta.
Why put anything out?
Okay. Okay. There's one for you, and then go ahead and take these back to them. And after this, we've got questions, and we'll wrap it up. All right. So, sir, come here. Draw a ticket for me. All right, drum roll, please. If you didn't win, it's his fault.
I'm out of here. Give me a minute to get out of here.
Okay, go ahead. 7365. All right, the 2 winners, see me right afterwards. I'll get you a little coupon, and you can take it over. All right, and let's see, where's my thing? All right, so I'm going to come back to this slide in a minute. If you want to take a quick picture of this, that's where you can get the presentation. And then I also have some resources at the end of that presentation where you can download a plant list, and also there's a link for where you can get some free milkweed seeds from the state. So if you go there, that's the link and the QR code. And with that, I'm going to take a little bit of water because I'm about parched. I know somebody raised their hands. Yes, I think he won the second one. All right, so cool. Any questions? Any input? Yes, ma'am. Can you step up to the microphone so I can hear you? Or actually, where'd he go? Luke, can you? He'll hand it to you.
There you go.
I wasn't here for the presentation, but I'm interested in keeping bees.
Okay. Do you see those yellow flags right there?
Yep.
That's where you need to go. That's where the Blackwater Beekeepers Association is, and they'll tell you everything you ever wanted to know, and we're afraid to ask.
Okay. And what is this?
This was a presentation on pollinators and bees, and I'll be doing it again Sunday.
Oh, so you're done right now?
Yeah, I'm done. I just finished.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but you can take a picture of take a picture of that. You can download the presentation. Any other questions? Feedback? Nope. Yeah. Can you give her the mic?
I worry about them spraying for mosquitoes. And when I call, they tell me that what they spray won't harm the bees.
Yes, yes and no. What they do is they work very closely with us. We can actually go to a website, most of the people in our club. And actually, we've been told we have the largest club in the state. So, yay! We have about 170, 180 people in the club. And we can go to a website from the county and actually put our location in. They will come out and GPS our location. And as best they can, they will avoid it. And the reason why I say that is if they have certain disease breakouts or they find certain things in the mosquitoes, they have to spray. Now, there's also a map that we can go that they provide where we can go and see when they're going to spray in our area. And the really cool thing about when I say spray, most of us just have to worry about the airplane because the stuff they spray from the road is only good for about, 100 yards, I think?
Yeah.
100 feet. I think it's 100 feet from the road. Okay, and if you've got a larger lot, for instance, I'm on 3 acres, and my bees are about 200 to 300 feet back. So generally the road doesn't bother them, but they will stop spraying when they cross my road. Now the stuff in the air, it's a lot like this organic I was talking about. It's contact, but it doesn't spread. It just kills what it hits. So a lot of us will, one, cover our hives, but two, they spray at night. So kind of like what I was talking about, spraying the organics, and with 60 to 80,000 bees, you're going to lose some, but you're not going to lose a lot because at that time of night when they spray, most of them are inside anyway. Did that answer your question? Any others? All righty, great. Thank you so much. Hopefully you learned a little something. And you two who won, come on up and I will